I do love you, Joelle. You have your Jedi Master. Like you're gonna bring it all to a very serious level. You can tell.
What's that?
What's next then? Jump forward.
We just got on bottom. We're letting it settle. We're gonna take 2 Niskins.
Do you think you can do that without stirring it?
And then we're gonna start push cornering if we can see it.
Looks like it's come out.
And Maka, are you willing to
Okay, so
you'll be getting a little bit busy.
welcome to everyone joining this this ROV dive online on the Falcor 2 on ROV Sebastian. And for those of you joining this dive for the first time, we are on an expedition in southern Chile, and we'll be talking through during this dive what you can see and what we're investigating in this project. So my name is Seb Watt. I'm a volcanologist from the University of Birmingham in the UK, and I'm here with a number of scientific colleagues from various countries, but particularly from Chile, and we're working on a multidisciplinary project ranging from marine biological investigation to geological investigation to explore the impact of volcanic processes on the marine environment in this part of southern Chile. We're particularly focusing in this project on an event in 2008 from a volcano called Chaiten, which was a large explosive eruption which caused a variety of impacts on the landscape, severe and devastating impacts in many areas immediately around the volcano, and impacts that actually reached right across South America, depositing ash over a lot of Argentina. So this was a really significant event in this region, with long-term consequences that can still be seen today. What isn't understood, though, is the impact that this event had on the adjacent marine environment and ecosystem, and that's really what we're exploring in this project. We're interested in that for a number of reasons. We want to understand how, when all the material produced in these volcanic eruptions and when that material enters the adjacent sea, how that is transported, deposited, and the effects that has. We'd like to understand how that's preserved in the long-term geological record to see if we can use our understanding to piece together longer-term archives of eruptive events, so potentially to explore and understand eruptions that we don't yet know about. And that will help us understand the variety of processes and hazards that characterize these volcanoes. And we'd also like to understand how, when these events occur, these major environmental disturbances, how the environment is affected by that. And we're looking at the biological imprint of these events. We'd like to understand the ecosystems on the seabed in this region, and particularly the relationship of that with volcanic processes. Now, this is a little studied region in terms of marine geoscience, so everything we're finding here is new. We already, in the past week or so, have really advanced our knowledge and understanding of sediment transport processes, of seafloor morphology, so the shape of the seafloor, the processes that have shaped that seafloor, which will include glaciation, sediment transport by ocean currents, and of course sediment input from the adjacent land, from volcanic events, from the river systems, and so on. So we're getting a lot of new understanding from the variety of data that we're collecting. And that data includes seabed mapping, geophysical data that helps us image just beneath the seabed and understand whether those conditions are erosive or depositional. And of course from the ROV dives as well. So the ROV dives are part of our data set, but they help ground truth our interpretations. They allow us to collect samples, they allow us to make visual observations, and these are really important to help test our interpretations. And we're really, really fortunate to be able to do this, to be able to employ this method, this amazing technology that we have access to here on the Falcor 2 and with the ROV Sebastian, which enables us to do things that we couldn't normally do with many types of field work or even marine surveys. And in particular here, we're able to take core samples directly from the seabed and to see what we are collecting, to pinpoint those samples, to understand their quality, and to understand the environment in which they have been collected. So this greatly sort of adds to our knowledge and the data set that we can collect. So on this dive, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to collect another water sample from the seabed, and then we're going to follow a similar sequence that we have in previous dives. Becky, this isn't really clearing. If you want to just go ahead.
I think let's just take in this
we'll go
in
ahead
and
get
go.
the water samples. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've just been waiting a little while for this to clear. This is clearly soft sediment here, a lot of mud, and we've kicked up a lot of this on landing. So that's why this is sort of, the water is so murky and turbid. But we're just getting sight of the seafloor now. So I think we'll go ahead and collect our next water sample. So we can collect two Niskins, please. Yeah, 3 and 4, please. So we're getting these water samples, and we've previously collected some a few meters above the seabed, and this sort of helps us understand the environment and local conditions of the water at the seafloor. So we just fired 3. Niskin 3 has been fired for the logging, and 4. Okay, Jacob, you got that? 3 and 4? Cool. Okay. So could we go on to the push course, please? It's bad visibility, I know. It was clearing, now it's So do you think perhaps turning a bit? Just still away. Okay. So we can see a lot of life on the seabed here, attracted, I think, by all this mud that we've dislodged and kicked up into the water. So we've got all these krill swimming around and a few fish as well. So someone's asking of these new species of fish. I'm certainly not the person to answer that question, but my marine biologist colleagues behind me investigating and recording and logging on this dive. They're not actually particularly looking at the fish. Their specific interests are in the fauna that live in the sediment, but we are logging everything we see here, and through those logs, through those images, we'll be able to identify species that we can see in these environments. So we're just moving to the push core. And while we're collecting this, I'm going to hand over to others in the room to also talk a bit about the work they're doing and their interests in the project. One of the things that I feel is a really exciting and important element of this cruise is the variety of the scientific team that we have here. As I mentioned earlier, we've got more than half of the team are from Chile, from the Universidad de Chile, from the Universidad de Valparaiso, Universidad de Playa Ancha. So we have a range of Chilean representatives working on the geology, on the biology, with expertise in glaciology as well, and micropaleontology. So a wide range of Chilean students and scientists joining us, which is really important, both the diversity of the team. A lot of those student participants, this is their first marine geoscience project, so it's really important for sort of training and experience to maximize that potential through projects like this. But what we're also participating in, and what's also a major aim of our expedition, is the outreach work. So we've run a number of ship to shores with local schools, And our study area, offshore Chaiten, is a very isolated region of Chile. We're in southern Chile, with many island communities, many remote island communities, on which there are very small schools, which are sort of not closely connected to other parts of Chile. And we're really lucky to also have a school teacher from one of these islands, Dani Levenyanko from the Isla Chuit, who's the school teacher at that school. And we're actually going to be welcoming school children on board the Falcor 2 tomorrow when we'll be anchoring offshore Chaiten town. So this is a really exciting part of the project, and I think really important to have that connection to the community in the area in which we are working. So I have Dani behind me, and she is going to talk about her work, her interests, and what she's doing on this expedition. So I'm going to hand over to Dani.
La comuna de Chaiten. Bien, mejor. Y se han realizado alrededor de 12 contactos hacia las escuelas rurales de la comuna de Chaiten, tanto en la parte de la cordillera como del sector costero de Chaiten, península de Chaiten y parte urbana de Chaiten y islas desertores que componen las 16 escuelas públicas de la comuna. Para hacer un poco de contextualización, cuando ocurrió este desastre volcánico, que es lo que es material de esta investigación, la erupción del volcán Chaiten sucedió el 1 de mayo del 2008, luego de 36 horas de sismos que lo antecedieron. Mucha de la población, incluso personal de gobierno, pensaba que esta erupción volcánica era producido por el volcán Michimahuida, que se encuentra justo cercano a la zona. Ya cercano a las 12 de la noche ocurre esta erupción volcánica que alerta a toda la población de Chaiten y comienza un trabajo inmediato de todos los medios públicos y civiles para iniciar esta evacuación de alrededor de 5.000 personas que habitaban en ese entonces la ciudad de Chaiten. Explicar también que producido la emergencia comienza un proceso de evacuación inmediata donde acudieron diferentes tipos de embarcaciones, tanto del ámbito público como del ámbito privado, asegurando también la rápida evacuación de toda la comunidad. Mediante decreto del Estado era necesario hacer evacuación total del territorio, por lo tanto se produjeron evacuaciones también en las ciudades cercanas, tanto como Palena y Futaleufú. Muchas de las personas que fueron evacuadas partieron hacia distintos puntos cercanos a la región de los lagos, considerando, por ejemplo, lugares como Puerto Montt, Castro Achao, cercano a Chiloé, y poblados cercanos, considerando que Chaiten se encuentra en la parte que inicia o da conexión inicial a la carretera austral. Toda esta catástrofe natural significó también la implicancia para muchos otros sectores que conectan el sur de Chile. Sectores, por ejemplo, que se conectan con la carretera austral, Aysén, La Junta, que llega incluso hasta Caleta Tortel. Para seguir contando acerca de esta emergencia, contarles, por ejemplo, que en el sector cercano a Chaiten, en el mar interior de Chiloé, existe una isla llamada Talcán, que sirvió como base de operaciones para personal de la Marina y personal de diversos estamentos gubernamentales que necesitaban un lugar cercano donde realizar sus maniobras de aterrizaje. Lo que fue el aeródromo de Santa Bárbara, todos los sectores cercanos se vieron perjudicados por la ceniza del volcán Chaiten, que logró dar la vuelta al mundo. Hay que considerar que esta erupción volcánica tuvo gran potencia. Era sencillo ver en las noticias de repente cómo esta pluma de ceniza volcánica iba girando alrededor del mundo y se mostraba con eso y se evidenciaba la potencia de esta erupción. En sus inicios, al considerarse que podía haber sido el volcán Michimahuida el que haya hecho erupción, se corrió con bastante premura haciendo estas labores de evacuación, considerando que ya existían antecedentes de otros volcanes que habían hecho erupción y que habían colapsado en sus nubes de material piroclástico. Por lo tanto, había una especie de miedo constante en toda la comunidad que esta nube sobre la superficie de la ciudad de Chaiten pudiera colapsar y pudiera así sepultar casas y la población. Dentro de las labores de trabajo de difusión diarias en estos chip to shore que se realizan, se considera mucho el trabajo que va realizando el equipo científico dentro del buque Falcorchu. Es un trabajo diario, comunicando, por ejemplo, cómo se realizan las inmersiones del robot Sebastian, contando un poco la historia del buque Falcorchu, el proceso, cómo fue habilitado para que sea un buque científico. Y se muestran los diferentes laboratorios, tanto geofísicos, geológicos, laboratorio de biología marina y trabajo constante que realizan los profesionales dentro del buque. Por lo tanto, las labores de difusiones son diarias y son actualizadas. Vamos entregando datos en tiempo real del trabajo que se va realizando aquí en el Falcorchu. Estas sesiones de Falcorchu de Chip to Shore finalizan aproximadamente el lunes 16 de septiembre, considerando que en Chile se avecina un fin de semana extremadamente largo con festividades patrias, lo que obviamente no repercute en las actividades dentro del buque. Esta misión finaliza el día 23 a 24 de septiembre y durante todos los días y durante toda la noche existen turnos de 12 horas en que los científicos están realizando trabajo constante. Sobre todo el grupo de geofísica, que está realizando un trabajo de mapeo en la superficie del mar interior de Chiloé. Ya se ha trabajado en transectas solicitadas e informadas desde el seno del Reloncaví, considerando el fiordo del Reloncaví. Después, como segundo o tercer punto, la zona de la parte norte de las islas Butachauques. Luego el barco inició nuevamente mapeo en el sector de Islas Desertores, cercano al islote Nihuel. Y ya cercano a lo que es el poblado de Chaiten, llevamos aproximadamente 4 días realizando un mapeo entre el sector frente a la playa Santa Bárbara, lo que es el Cerro Vilcún, y el buque se está moviendo de norte a sur desde ese sector hasta la parte, el inicio de la parte norte del Golfo de Corcovado. En este preciso momento nos encontramos en la parte sur de la isla Talcán, cercano al Bajo Renault, donde se están extrayendo muestras del fondo marino, sedimentos sobre todo para el trabajo tanto del equipo geológico, de geología marina, y trabajo de los biólogos marinos. Considerar que este es un trabajo multidisciplinario donde los diferentes equipos profesionales van rotando de sector en sector, aprender las técnicas de repente de rescate de información, ir aprendiendo uno de los equipos científicos. Sebastián.
So yeah, many thanks, Danny, for talking through your work and your experience, and of course your sort of direct knowledge and understanding of this region, which has been really interesting to be discussing so far among the science team during the expedition. And you know, we've learned a huge amount from those who live in the region or have worked in the past in the region. Alongside Danny, we have other Chilean scientists who have worked here over many years. I think for those who were here yesterday, we heard from Javier Cañete, who has done repeated surveys of the Chaiten delta system in the aftermath of the eruption. It's been very interesting to hear about his work as well. And other Chilean geoscientists who have a lot of knowledge of the region, and that's really informed our work and our science here, not just during this expedition, but of course during the whole planning process over the past couple of years as we've been developing these research plans. So as Danny may have been discussing, we are welcoming a number of children from several schools on the ship tomorrow, and that has all been sort of put in place by various members of the science team working with Danny and those leading the outreach plans on this expedition. So we hope to be able to show them the work that we're doing. They'll get an experience of the facilities on the ship and the laboratories, and I hope it'll be a really exciting day for the children who get to visit the ship to get an understanding of this type of science. And of course it'll be really exciting and interesting for us all to learn from them as well and get that perspective by connecting with the communities in this region. Now we've got a whole range of other scientists on board the ship. Behind me in the room I have one of our marine biologists, not two today, sometimes we have two, but we just have Diego today from the Universidad de Valparaiso, and he is busy logging the biology that we're observing. And then we have Macarena Perez from the Universidad de Playa Ancha, who is as they come in. So we have sort of various members of the team watching the ROV feeds and logging each observation, whether those are biological or geological observations, or indeed just recording the sampling that we're doing. And we also have Jacob Helgeson from the University of Alabama, who is here also logging as well. So we've got a busy team, and Becky Totten, Dr. Becky Totten is behind me.
Hi everyone.
Who, if you've been on previous dives, you'll have heard from her as well, of course, about her work. So we're all sitting in the room, all working together on this dive, and it's it's a really exciting element of this research to have such a team with us. So Diego, I don't know, did you want to say a few words about your work and what you're doing, and then we can hear from Macarena as well.
Sí, Sebastián. Bueno, mi nombre es Diego Droguet, en el que sacamos, quiere decir que viven de manera sedentaria, entonces estos aprovechan la caída de la materia orgánica que cae, que es un efecto llamado nieve marina. Entonces aquí se adquiere la materia orgánica y adquieren también sus nutrientes, y también aquí se encuentran también algunos organismos ya más móviles, que son carnívoros y se alimentan de otro tipo de invertebrados. Bien, lo que más hemos encontrado en esta expedición son poliquetos, que son gusanos marinos, y se encuentran acá la mayoría inmersos en el fondo, en el sedimento. La mayoría se encuentra de hecho en los primeros 5 centímetros. Y entre otros organismos que hemos encontrado también son otros invertebrados como bivalvos, gastrópodos, anfípodos y otro tipo de crustáceos. Es muy curioso también que nos han salido varias mantis de mar del orden estomatópodo, que son organismos muy curiosos, son unos depredadores muy voraces. Y también nos han salido, por ejemplo, una estrella canasta, que es una especie de ofiuro muy grande, muy curioso, que es lo que más nos ha llamado la atención. Y bueno, al menos en este punto no se puede lograr apreciar mucha epifauna, que son la fauna de invertebrados marinos que viven por encima de la superficie del sedimento. No se puede apreciar mucho, se puede ver igual una alta turbidez, poca visibilidad, pero de igual manera esperamos al sacar la muestra encontrar una mayor variedad de organismos, de lo que no podemos ver aquí, al menos en las cámaras. Bueno, y también quería agregar al final que esto también sirve para estudiar la ecología del fondo marino y saber, por ejemplo, algún tipo de organismo bioindicador que pueda indicar contaminación o pueda indicar una baja abundancia, pueda indicar que las cenizas o los restos de la erupción volcánica han influido también en el ecosistema del fondo marino, pero eso es algo que podemos analizar a través, mientras más muestras sacamos. Los resultados preliminares al menos han indicado una abundancia, una diversidad no muy alta en estos lugares cercanos a Chaiten, pero esto se comparará con los otros resultados de otros sitios de muestreo.
Many thanks, Diego. So thanks for talking about the work you're doing as a student at the Universidad de Valparaiso, and we're working with colleagues at the Universidad de Valparaiso in various elements of this project, actually in the marine biology and also in the oceanography. So as well as Diego and Gianluca, and we have Claudia from the Universidad de Valparaiso, who is leading on the oceanography observations and measurements that we're making here. So all part of our sort of broad team. Now, I realised I didn't talk that much about the site that we're at. So we're actually quite a long way west of Chaiten volcano here, in one of the basins that is actually nearer the island of Chiloé. So this is one of the areas where we would expect the least volcanic influence. And it's important to collect samples and data from these sites as well, because they really help us understand spatial differences, so differences geographically across these inner seas of Chile, between the island of Chiloé and mainland Chile. As we've been finding from our mapping, it looks like the currents are complex through this region. The seafloor topography, the shape of the seabed is really complex. There's various sort of high ground, sort of maybe water depths of 50 meters or so, separated by deeper channels down to about 200 meters. But these channels are not sort of cut in the way that river channels are with a continuous gradient, but they actually go slightly up and down with a series of isolated basins, and are likely related both to the tectonic history of this area, which is heavily faulted due to its those faults are part of the subduction zone, the plate boundary on which this area lies, and the glaciation of the region has also shaped the seabed. So these channel features are probably sculpted by the history of the ice sheets that have moved over the seabed during previous glaciations in the region. So this makes for a complex seafloor which interacts with the currents and causes some significant differences and a lot of variety in both the features we see on the seabed, in whether there is sediment accumulating, and that in turn will be reflected in the biology and the sediment types. So we really want to examine a range of sites to sort of piece together that puzzle and get a comprehensive picture of the region. Now, the mapping and the geophysics gives us the most comprehensive picture, and then it's important to select these ROV sites across different environmental. We're not particularly expecting a strong direct volcanic input from Chaiten, at least in the form of flows, at least in the form of the processes that took place after the 2008 eruption. And those processes involved the water-driven transport of volcanic detritus that had been deposited around the slopes of the volcano in the days following the eruption. So all this detritus, what we call volcaniclastic sediment, ranging in size from sort of sand-sized material or finer right up to large blocks of pumice. All this was carried down through river systems in the aftermath of the eruption, forming these sediment-laden flows that inundated coastal regions. They built out deltas very rapidly, and that material would have then flowed and been deposited in the submarine environment. So as I say, this basin here is quite isolated from those flows, we expect, but it's not necessarily completely isolated from volcanic activity. The other mechanism by which volcanic material can enter this system is through airfall, through falling from the atmosphere following an explosive eruption. So what explosive eruptions can do is they can inject a plume of volcanic material, particularly fine-grained material that we call volcanic ash, and that plume can go up tens of kilometers into the atmosphere and is then dispersed by the wind, and it gradually sediments out, it falls back out through the atmosphere and is ultimately deposited on the ground. And the fallout, the rate at which that material falls, and therefore how far it travels, is linked to the wind speed, the wind direction, and the density and settling behavior and size of those particles. So this produces sort of blanketing deposits that not only can be deposited on land, but of course can be deposited on the seabed if those plumes travel in the right direction. And we've already found in some of our cores deposits that are consistent with that type of process, what we'd call tephra fall deposits. By tephra, essentially, you can think of that for these fine sediments as volcanic ash, so they're like volcanic ash fall deposits. So we have been seeing deposits of those type, and it is quite possible that in these sediments here there is a component, a contribution from volcanic airfall. So in these environments, one of the questions that we're interested in is the impacts of volcanic events, whether those are introduced by flow processes or airfall processes, on ecosystems. And one of the students working with us on this project is specifically studying the microbial ecology in these sediments.
Como decía, es Macarena Pérez, soy estudiante de doctorado en Ciencias Ambientales de la Universidad de Playa Ancha, en mi segundo año, y el doctorado se trata sobre ciencias ambientales, así que ese es mi rol en esta expedición del Falcor 2. Para esta ocasión vamos a estar aportando con el análisis de mercurio en los sedimentos, en los testigos de sedimento, tanto como la diversidad microbiana que existe para poder entender los efectos de la erupción de Chaiten y también la abundancia de los microorganismos que hay presentes tanto antes de la erupción, durante y después. De este modo nos sirve usar estos proxies para poder a microescala poder entender cómo funcionan los procesos volcánicos que rodean las islas y la ciudad de Chaiten. En esta expedición científica he estado participando en el equipo de testigos de Coring Team, liderado por los PIs, por Seb sobre todo. Hemos estado muestreando bastantes testigos, hemos podido encontrar registros de algunas capas de ceniza y actividad volcánica, lo que nos deja muy contentos ya en la primera semana transcurrida del proyecto. Y estamos ya ansiosos de poder volver a analizar estas muestras y ver qué es lo que nos arrojan los resultados, ver si encontramos algún tipo de erupción más antigua y ir correlacionando todas estas transectas que hacemos día a día dentro del barco.
Right, many thanks, Macarena, for talking about your work. So it's really great that we're able to hear from a variety of the scientists involved in this project, and I hope actually by the end of the expedition we can have got all the science team to have spoken to those listening on the chat. So I'm going to have to tick off and see how many we've had speak to you so far, but I think we must have had about half the team speaking now on these videos, which is really great. And we'll have to pull in a few others, Becky, to make sure we get everyone talking about their work and their interests, their background. Hopefully that makes these dives interesting to sort of get an understanding of the range of science going on in these projects. I'm conscious we haven't yet heard from the geophysicists that much, so they're busy in the room next door. They're They're working on processing the mapping data. So that's the bathymetry, what we call the backscatter, which tells us about the properties of the uppermost layer on the seafloor, and the sub-bottom profiling, which gives us like a slice, a two-dimensional slice down through the seafloor beneath the ship's track. And all of this is proving a really, really valuable data set to better understand the region. It's really the first sort of high-resolution mapping and sub-bottom data that we have access to in this region. So we're learning a lot about the complexity, actually, of this area. And I think, we realised there would be complexity, but I think this is revealing potentially even more complexity than we were expecting before the expedition. So it's very valuable to know that, both in terms of our immediate understanding, in terms of the results of this expedition, and in terms of planning future work in the region as well. So I think we're moving on now to our fourth scoop bag. Is that right, Chris? We're on the fourth one here. So these bags that we're taking, we've been taking them in the same area as the push cores. You might be wondering why we're taking these sort of bulk samples in seabed that we've already churned up and disturbed a bit. But actually this is quite useful for the biologists who are interested in the fauna, the myofauna, living within this sediment. So as Diego was perhaps talking to you about, this is what him and Gianluca, who are both now behind me, will be working on at the Universidad de Valparaiso. And we've been taking the push cores to get intact samples of that seafloor interface, and that gives us the potential for high resolution understanding of sedimentation rates if we can look carefully at the structure through those push cores and date those materials. That allows us to get accurate measurements of how rapidly the sediment is accumulating, and also to use that very uppermost layer to characterize the environment. But what the biologists are also interested in is the sort of the collective assemblage of organisms that are living in this shallow sediments, that community of sort of sediment-dwelling, mud-dwelling organisms. And they're particularly interested in a variety of species, a lot of which are on a very small scale. How big are myofauna, Gianluca? What's the dimensions?
300 microns up to lower,
Lower. So we're just having a discussion on the size of myofauna, but essentially sub-millimeter scale, so microscopic scale, but not as small as some of the microorganisms that Becky has been discussing with you all on previous dives, so things like foraminifera, diatoms and so on. So somewhere in between, these sort of middle-sized fauna, although really they are still pretty small, challenging to see with the naked eye. And they've been sitting in the lab with the microscope looking at these organisms, and there's an amazing variety and diversity of forms and types that we find in this mud that might at first sight look barren, but is actually full of life. So these scoop bags will be sieved by them, and they'll be making observations of those materials. And they'd also use the push cores as well, actually, for geochemical measurements to understand the environment in which these organisms are living. So we might expect, with this variety of quieter areas with less volcanic input, and then these areas that are perhaps more subject to environmental change from volcanic input, we might expect to see differences in the nature of living organisms, perhaps in the diversity. That might perhaps relate both to the chemical changes and the chemistry of these sequences, something Macarena may have just been talking about, as well as to the sort of repeated inundation by external material from the land coming in following these volcanic eruptive events. So in the immediate region around Chaiten, there were very large thicknesses of sediment deposited on land. In the town of Chaiten itself, which was entirely evacuated in the days following the eruption, that was inundated by well over a meter of volcanic sediment that flooded throughout the town. And this was sort of a dilute flood with a lot of relatively fine-grained particles that could flow through buildings. It was destructive. These form quite dense flows, so they can damage roads and bridges and so on. And in fact, the river in Chaiten had such destructive potential that it cut an entirely new river channel through the central part of the town. And that river channel is now the active channel of the new Blanco River route. So the old channel was abandoned and has permanently been rerouted following the eruption. So it has literally had a permanent change in the face and form of the town. As I say, the town was entirely evacuated, and it took some time for it to be repopulated, but today it is repopulated. People are living again in Chaiten. But nevertheless, there's this permanent change in terms of the river system and in terms of the coastline. So very rapidly, after the 2008 eruption, the coastline was built out by this sediment. The harbour had to be resited, and what was previously the sort of the waterfront, if you like, where the main road travelled to the east of the town, is now a little way inland because of all this sediment that has formed this delta that grew following the eruption. So very dramatic changes on land, and close to the volcano we would expect very dramatic changes in the marine environment, and we can see that in the delta front. Those changes obviously will dissipate with distance depending on how the sediment is dispersed, and this is something we're exploring in this project. So we've just collected the final grab sample, which will be used by the biologists, and we're just going to move slightly before we take a Vibra core. So the Vibra cores use this mechanism that you can see on the front of the ROV, this sort of black mechanism with a big cable going round, and you can just see the silver Vibra core tube there in position. So we're just going to move a bit because we sort of disturbed this immediate area of seabed. And then we'll collect the first Vibra core. And these Vibra cores allow us to collect material much deeper than the push cores. The push cores have been recovering on this cruise about 20 up to about 23 centimetres of sediment, are the sort of best recovery we get. Whereas yesterday, with a couple of the Vibra cores, we had over 1.5 metres of sediment recovered. So a significant difference there that allows us to get right down into deeper stratigraphy and therefore older events. So that allows us to understand longer term environmental change, longer term sedimentary processes, and more what we would call broadly event layers. So something that sort of disturbs the background where there's an input of different sediment, and that could be volcanic ash as airfall, it could be deposits derived from volcanic flows, it could also of course be other types of flow driven material, so perhaps after flood events or storm events, or even those triggered by earthquakes in the region. So all of these can trigger mass flows that move over the seabed and would rapidly bring in large volumes of sediment that then become interbedded with the mud that accumulates gradually in these environments. So the Vibra cores give us that longer perspective, and we're going to try and collect 2 more at this site. Okay, right, so as we're moving, and we'll settle down, and hopefully this will clear, I'm going to hand over to Danny again, who's going to tell a bit more about the region, to build on what she was saying earlier. So, over again to Danny.
Ok, thank you, Seb. Hola nuevamente, soy profesora de la Escuela Rural Chuit, soy Dani Leviñanco. Más que nada para hacer una contextualización del territorio para las personas que están... Hola a todos. Este territorio en el que estamos haciendo este trabajo de investigación corresponde al mar interior de Chiloé. Chiloé resulta ser una isla grande separada del territorio continental de Chile, que alberga a su vez otras islas que componen ciertos archipiélagos. Chiloé es un territorio con comunas que administran estas islas y podemos observar el archipiélago de las Butachauques, por ejemplo, archipiélago de las Islas Quinchao, que rodea este territorio, hace alusión a dos espíritus ancestrales, una batalla milenaria que se libró en este territorio por dos energías que tomaron forma de serpientes gigantes, donde una era Tentembilú, la serpiente ligada al poder de la tierra, y Kaikai-Bilú, quien tenía la energía del mar, la energía del territorio marítimo, todo lo que compone esta gran masa de agua. Se cree que estas dos fuerzas hermanas, la dualidad que existe en el pueblo mapuche, siempre en parejas, el día, la noche, el bien, el mal, el yin y el yang, estaron en una batalla que duró aproximadamente 40 días y 40 noches, según nos cuentan los relatos orales. Considerar eso sí que un mito nos habla de la formación de algo. Siempre un mito nos detalla el por qué existe algo. Existen mitos ligados a la existencia del sol, existen mitos ligados al por qué la luna sale de noche, existen mitos de cómo se formó el mundo. Este mito de Tenten y Kaikai-Bilú habla de cómo este territorio logra fragmentarse y separarse del territorio. Se dice que en un momento la energía del mar, la energía de Kaikai-Bilú, consideró que los seres humanos estaban realizando mucha extracción y siendo de alguna forma dañinos con el territorio. Despertó a esta serpiente y comenzó a elevar los mares. Los mares subían y los seres vivos que habitaban todo el territorio terrestre caían al mar y morían. En eso el pueblo que existe en este territorio, los mapuches del sur, llamados huilliches, del cual yo pertenezco, soy parte de este pueblo huilliche, mi apellido lo corrobora. Mi apellido es Leviñanco, que significa aguilucho veloz, por lo tanto, como representante de este pueblo, como representante de los profesores, les comento esta historia, más que nada para dar orientación a cómo la cosmovisión mapuche logra también hacerse parte de la explicación de una formación de un territorio. Se cree que los indígenas que acudían hacia las montañas comenzaron a hacer rogativas que lograron despertar el espíritu ancestral de la serpiente terrestre Tentembilú, quien inmediatamente comenzó a soplaba, para elevar las montañas. Mientras tanto, Kaikai-Bilú soplaba y soplaba para que las aguas se levantaran. Es así que todo el territorio, las llanuras, los territorios bajos lograron ser inundados. Y el territorio que conformaba las cordilleras, las montañas llamadas Mahuidas, son las que hoy en día conforman este territorio insular. Es un mito que contrasta con el gran diluvio universal y es un mito que nos viene a explicar esta formación de un territorio a nivel espiritual, según lo que cree el pueblo, lo que creemos en el pueblo mapuche, relacionado a nuestras energías, a los ñenes que componen gran parte y que están presentes en distintos elementos de la naturaleza. Cada elemento, cada ser tiene un espíritu que está en directa relación con la ñuque, con la mapu. Podemos contrastar también este mito con que esta formación del archipiélago a nivel científico ahora está en directa relación con la última glaciación Wisconsin, ocurrida, no sé, hace más de 12.000 años atrás, 12.000 a 15.000 años, donde todo este territorio claramente logró ser fragmentado por por la existencia de grandes masas de hielo que al derretirse lograron conformar lagos fluviales. El objetivo de esta misión, a través del mapeo submarino, es lograr contrastar, asegurar de alguna forma que este territorio en verdad guarda vestigios de esta última glaciación y cómo los territorios fueron esculpidos con el derretimiento de estos hielos. Además de el mito de Tenténica y Cabilú, existen leyendas en el territorio de Chiloé que vinculan a ciertas energías, a ciertos ñenes y les dan poder por sobre todo en la protección de los espacios. Se habla así de la existencia de la pincoya, que viene siendo la diosa de los mares. Por generaciones se ha hablado de la existencia de este espíritu que danza en noches de luna llena en dos direcciones. La pincoya, siendo diosa de los mares, está encargada de todos los seres que Tentembilú intentó salvar, que cayeron al mar y que a raíz de toda esta magia, de toda esta espiritualidad, logró darles un poco de vida. Se cree que los animales, los seres humanos que cayeron al mar fueron transformados en diferentes seres vivos. Eso es lo que dice nuestra cultura. Algunos se transformaron en piedras, otros se transformaron en peces, en crustáceos, y es así como la vida marina del archipiélago de Chiloé, del mar interior de Chiloé, logra estar poblado por todas esas especies. ¿Quién los cuida? La diosa de los mares, doña Pincoya. Se cree que cuando la pincoya danza mirando hacia el mar, anuncia prosperidad en el territorio. Por lo tanto, todo el borde costero va a estar alimentando las comunidades costeras. Hay que considerar que esta zona es rica en peces, en mariscos, que logran ser la base de la alimentación del territorio. Los poblados costeros, los sectores insulares, las personas que habitan estos territorios llamados guapiches se alimentan gran parte del año y forma parte base de la dieta alimenticia de peces y mariscos que logran ser capturados en mareas bajas y que para una forma de mantener su integridad a lo largo del tiempo pueden ser ahumados y secados al humo. Por lo tanto, si la pincoya, la diosa de los mares, baila mirando hacia el mar, lo que nos dice es que este territorio va a estar muy bien alimentado. Vamos a encontrar mariscos en demasía. Por el contrario, si la pincoya baila mirando hacia la montaña, es un castigo claro hacia las comunidades que lo más probable no han tenido un buen comportamiento, han causado algún tipo de estragos en el borde costero, y eso hace que los mariscos y los pescados se alejen de todo ese territorio. Se cree a su vez que las personas sobre todo pescadores, que ven a la pincoya, quedan tan enamorados de esta diosa marina que se van con ella al fondo del mar. Y ahí también tenemos el contraste de que todo ser que habita este territorio, que perece en el mar, puede estar tripulando uno de los barcos fantasmas que circula todo el mar interior de Chiloé, llamado Caleuche. El Caleuche también es otra de las leyendas que tenemos en el territorio. Y considerando los espíritus, los ñenes que hacen advertencia o que cuidan el maritorio, se puede nombrar también el caballo marino que transporta a estas almas hacia el Caleuche. También se les relaciona mucho con los brujos, tierra de mitología y leyendas. Tenemos también al Cuchi Bilú, mitad cerdo y mitad serpiente, que logra ser como un espíritu destructivo, que a lo mejor aliado con la pincoya se encarga de llevarse o de causar un caos, un estrés en los bosques, en los bordes costeros para que no existan moluscos ni peces. Se cree que el cuchibilú se sacude cercano a los bordes costeros, rompe corrales de pescas y logra infestar las playas para que en mucho tiempo no exista ningún tipo de organismo viviendo acá. Eso más que nada siendo la contextualización del territorio marítimo y todo lo que significa las creencias, las tradiciones de este territorio. Además de eso existen otros seres, obviamente, que son parte de la mitología de Chiloé, en la cual podemos nombrar a la huanchula, el pincoy, que viene siendo hermano de la pincoya, al chireno, la vaca marina, por ejemplo, y al camagüeto. Todos estos días hemos estado cercanos a la costa de Chaiten, iniciando trabajo cercano a la parte de desembocadura del río Rayas en Chana. Luego nos trasladamos al sector de Santa Bárbara, entre el sector Camagüeto y Santa Bárbara, y ahí tenemos nuevamente la incidencia de un nuevo ser mitológico, el camagüeto. Se cree que una machi, autoridad ancestral del pueblo mapuche, a través de toda esta conexión espiritual que logra tener, hace la siembra de un camagüeto en un sector. Bueno, existen diferentes tipos de leyendas en las que en una hace incidencia la machi o en otra un brujo o una bruja llamadas calcu. Ellos siembran en un territorio seco llamado valle, un sector con pasto, una pampa, por ejemplo. Se siembra la raspadura del cacho de camagüeto y durante 30 o 40 años crece en el interior de este territorio un ternero que tiene un único cuerno, un ternero unicornio llamado camagüeto. Este camagüeto, al llegar a la adultez, a los 40 años, emerge y busca ruta hacia el mar. De tal manera podemos encontrar que en estos territorios comienzan a inundarse, a crearse los mallines, que son los reservorios de agua, llamados servicios ambientales, que hacen posible que esta agua se mantenga dentro de los territorios. La creación de un mallín tiene directa relación con esta leyenda, cómo crece un mallín, cómo nace un mallín y cómo después estos mallines buscan ruta hacia el mar para hacer la desembocadura natural, que es el cauce natural del agua hacia el mar. Por lo tanto, se cree que este camagüeto, este unicornio, a su adultez, en los 40 años, inicia esa ruta hacia el mar y puede ser capturado en noche de luna llena por una machi, utilizando un cordel de una alga marina llamada sargazo. Único elemento que puede sostener el gran poder que tiene este ser mitológico, la gran fuerza. ¿Cuál es el interés de capturar al camagüeto? El cacho, el unicornio, ese cuerno, el único cuerno que tiene poderes místicos relacionados a la magia, que puede curar cualquier enfermedad y da vigor a los hombres que pierden el vigor durante su proceso de adultez. Si nos pasamos un poco de darle raspadura de cacho de camagüeto a un ser humano, se dice que la persona está encamagüetada. Eso más que nada, Sebastián, en la contextualización del territorio costero, del mar interior de Chiloé, en el área cultural y mitológica. Gracias. Con ustedes, Sebastián Watts, líder de esta misión científica.
Sorry, I was distracted by watching the Vibra core retrieval there. So yeah, many thanks, Danny, for speaking to everyone again. Okay, so as Danny was speaking, you'll have been watching the imagery and you'll have been able to see this Vibra core go really deep into this soft sediment. So we had very good penetration into the sediment. These are 2 meter long tubes. So, you know, we might, as I say, yesterday we had 2 cores that were over 1.5 meters. So hopeful of something similar from this one. One thing we've noticed is this is very soft sediment, so it may be quite compressible. It's possible we'll see a shorter core simply because of that compression. But we've made some adjustments and actually tried to minimize the resistance on these tubes as they go into the seabed. And one thing we've done is modified what we call the core catcher, which is a set of teeth that sits in the bottom of these tubes, a sort of inverted cup shape. So you can't see it, but just inside the base of these tubes are these teeth that spring back when the sediment's going in, and then they spring closed when we stop pushing it down, and therefore they're like a one-way valve. They sort of hold the sediment above. And we had a feeling in these muddy sediments that the core catcher was potentially offering quite a lot of resistance and causing compression. So we've slightly sort of modified the length of those teeth to try to limit that resistance and ease the passage of the sediment into the core tube, the core barrel. So we'll see what the recovery is. This is a good test in this sort of soft sediment to compare with those we were getting earlier in the expedition. So we'll only know for sure when we get that on deck, and when we slice off the top of the tube, remove that water that'll be sitting in there, and then we can seal and measure the full sediment core. As I've said on previous dives, we will open some of these on board, which is why we're collecting duplicates, and we will archive one to look at in the lab on our return under more controlled conditions and where we can conduct additional types of scanning. But we can still do a lot on the ship. We've got a good photography setup. We've got systems where we can measure some compositional information, even magnetic properties, and we can of course do detailed descriptions. So it's really useful to be able to open some on board to undertake some initial sampling, measurements and observations, and those observations can then guide us when we're selecting further sites. So it's very helpful to sort of know what we're collecting. Otherwise, if we kept everything sealed, we'd never really know until we got back into the lab, and it might be many months' time before we sort of have that information. So yes, well, we're just discussing with the pilots whether we can actually collect a duplicate here. May not be able to, just looking at the clamp on the Vibra core. So I'm just going to discuss that. We're just looking at the Vibra core clamp to see if we can collect a second tube. Otherwise, we'll have to look at that back on the ship. So it seems that during that core collection there was just a slight issue with this clamp. Some difficulty. There we are. See if it looks like it's opening and closing.
It's a little funky, but we might do it.
You reckon we can do it?
Yeah, so it's definitely something's wrong.
To do with the hinge?
And the hinge,
Sort of
but
twisting.
It looks like we can close it.
Yeah.
We can open it, so we'll take the next one.
Brilliant.
Clamp it in there and then figure it out. We'll recover.
Great. Okay, so good news. Looks like we can collect a duplicate core here, which is well, we'll see. We'll get it into the clamp and see how it performs. But I'm hopeful that if we can collect that duplicate, it means we can open one. So if we couldn't collect the second one, we would leave the one we collected archived. So our priority is the archive one. But the duplicate would be really useful, particularly since we're getting nearly 2 meters penetration here. Be really helpful to be able to open that on board. To move a little bit, yeah, just a couple of meters again, thanks, if that's possible. Do you want to get the core in position first or move first?
6-1.
Yeah, it's up to whatever's easy for you. So we move a short distance because obviously we don't want to put the core down in exactly the same place twice. We'd be, in theory, going into a hole, although in reality that hole will sort of slump in with sediment, so we'd sort of be coring disturbed sediment from higher up, and we wouldn't be getting a representative stratigraphy. So we move a few meters to a new location, but very nearby. We'd expect a near identical stratigraphy over that distance, and we'll collect this duplicate. So the next part of the process will be to retrieve that core number 3. You can probably see it there with the number 3 written on it. So position 3 on the rack. So another 2-meter tube. So just opening the gate there, move that across into the clamp, which was the clamp on the Vibra coral was the part of the kit that we were just struggling with in terms of wondering whether we had to come up and look at it. But the ROV pilots have managed to just knock it back very slightly into position, and it seems to be opening and closing without issue. So hopefully we can complete this dive as planned, and then look at that when the ROV is back on board. So the next stage will be to bring this tube around and put it into position in the Vibra clamp, and hopefully then move slightly, just a couple of meters, and then go down again. So pretty challenging to maneuver these 2-meter tubes. There's a reasonable amount of weight on them, but there's a lot of weight in them when they've got sediment in them. So this is very challenging and precise work that the ROV pilots are doing to get these into position. It's a delicate operation to maneuver all these arms. And as you'll have seen with the push course, this really got this down to a T really in terms of a smooth technique, minimizing disruption, and it is certainly not easy to retrieve these, to keep these vertical, to get them into position in the holders and then insert them into the holders is really very skillful. Okay, so we've got the same team behind us, except one of our loggers has been replaced by Amalia, who has just come back in to be logging. So Amalia is saying hello. She is a student at the Universidad de Valparaiso, to Chile, in Santiago, and she's been logging on several of these dives. So we've got a team of event loggers who can swap over and circulate as these dives go on. And of course we run operations on the ship 24 hours. So while we're not doing ROV dives for 24 hours, we have a whole range of things going on for 24-hour periods. So we're on shift, we're operating on a shift pattern. So our teams are coming on and off shift, so they're swapping around through the day. In fact, I think Amalia is also doing some of the night shift. Is that right? You were doing some of the geophysics work at 4 this morning. Yeah. So some long days or some early starts, but of course there's an opportunity for the students on board to learn a range of new skills and techniques to get insight into all these different methods. So generally what we're doing is spending the night acquiring geophysical data, so seafloor mapping, the sub-bottom profiles that I mentioned earlier, and then we've got a team. That team is then processing this data through the day, putting it into mapping programs so we can visualize it and plan and interpret it, and then plan potential ROV dive sites. So we do this sort of repeated sequence, and then when this comes on deck, our geology and biology teams will be processing the samples. They'll be opening some of the cores, describing those cores, processing the sediment that we retrieve, using various techniques. So they might be sieving sediments to then be picking out particular grains. They might be studying these under the microscopes by making slides of this material. There's various things that Becky and her team are doing in the lab. They're staining some of this youngest sediment to identify the amount of living material in there. So there's all sorts of things that we're doing on board. So it's a sort of busy workflow and procedure when this comes back on board, to recover and then store the samples and package them for then subsequent work after the expedition. So it's a busy set of processes. We've got a team of around 25 working across all those different elements, and I think certainly everyone's keeping busy, lots of tasks to be doing. So we're just moving, Chris, are we?
Yeah, we're
Going
moving,
forward.
and then I pushed the core through the gate to make sure that any mud or sediment that was from the previous spot is out of the way for us.
Great. Excellent. Yeah, so you might have been noticing that on the front of the ROV, because the mud is so soft here, we've got this little sort of mound of debris. So Chris, one of the ROV pilots, was just saying to me how they've sort of cleared the mud from the gate of the Vibra to avoid us accidentally getting some of that sediment in the core that is not really representative of the immediate spot where we're landing. So we want to avoid that if possible. So we're just coming down back to the seabed in this new position. Wait for some of this sediment to clear, and then we'll see how things operate as we try and go in for a second core. So this clamp that they were trying to fix a few minutes ago, and that you can see, if you can see the top camera, I'm not quite sure what's visible, but if you can see that camera at the top left, you'll see the clamp in position on the core, and that holds the core firmly as the whole mechanism moves downwards, the whole vibrating mechanism moves downwards. So that clamp is pretty key. It needs to hold the tube tight enough that the tube doesn't slip through it. And it's that forces the core tube down into the sediment. And then when you release that clamp, you can move the whole mechanism up without the core moving, so it stays in position as far as it's been inserted so far. You move it up a bit and then you go down again, so you're pushing it down in a series of drives into the sediment. And with these 2 meter tubes, it takes sort of 3 drives based on the size of the mechanism. So all being well, you'll see that working in a second when this starts to go down. And we'll see how that clamp then releases, and if that allows us to then move up for a second drive. Amalia, do you want to say?
What?
Do you want to say?
About what? Yeah,
And
forestry.
you want to talk about your interests, how you got into geology?
I already talked about that.
Yeah, but these people may not have heard.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Amalia in a second, who, as I said, is one of our students on board from the Universidad de Chile. We've got several students from Universidad de Chile, and in particular they're working with Dr. Rodrigo Fernandez, who is one of the PIs on this expedition. He's a marine geologist, glaciologist in Chile, and students that he's working with, some of those are on board the ship. So one of those is Amalia, and I think she's just going to talk a little bit about her interests, how she got into geology, and what she's doing on board. So I'll hand over to Amalia.
Y ya pues se puede entrar en mi memoria. Nada, como yo entré a la geología, la verdad, me hablaron sobre eso hablaron, un tío me habló sobre la carrera y la verdad siempre la consideré, pero I should repeat what I said. No, it's okay. Y me hablaron sobre la carrera y al principio como que no estaba tan interesada, pero eventualmente con el tiempo y investigando un poco de la carrera me gustó bastante. Así que entré a la Universidad de Chile a un plan común de ingeniería y la verdad sufrí bastante porque no era lo que yo quería estudiar, porque tenía que pasar 2 años para entrar a geología. Así que sufrí 2 años y después pude entrar y ahora estoy muy feliz porque nada, es una carrera muy bonita, muy no sé, como llenadora y aprendes mucho, hay muchas cosas que aprender y en especial el tema de poder salir a terreno y ver un poco más el mundo y entenderlo es muy bonito. Y eso. Y ahora estoy un poco más metida en lo que es la sedimentología, geología marina y ahora estoy trabajando en esto que seguramente va a ser parte de mi memoria el próximo año, este año y el próximo año. Y estoy bastante emocionada por ver los encuentros que vamos a hacer y lo que podemos estudiar de acá, que no ha sido muy estudiado. Así que eso, muchas gracias por escuchar. Estaré aquí unos días más, así que puede que me escuchen en algún otro momento. Eso.
And now she really likes microfossils.
Sí, ahora he visto unos microfósiles y son bastante bonitos. He dibujado algunos y ya me tienen que decir qué dibujar más porque...
Okay, yeah.
Gracias.
Many thanks, Somalia. Muchas gracias. Great to hear from you. I think we've heard from most people in the room now. I'm not sure we've heard from everyone. So we do have a few others here with us. We have Gianluca from the University of Valparaiso, who you may have heard on some previous dives. And we have Jacob, who was talking to us yesterday about diatoms, which I'm sure people always want to hear about. So Jacob's busy noting down this event, carefully noting down the timing of this, how the Vibra is performing. We've just done this first drive, just looking at this clamp here, which has opened up, and just, it's important when this clamp opens, if you've got a view of this, it's important that it doesn't lift the core back up with it, and that's something that can happen. So we shook it a bit there to release the clamp, so the barrel stays in position and the clamp moves up, and this is what allows the second and the third drive to push this deeper into the sediment. So it'd be good to see how this reclamps and whether this can go down again. So I'm just watching it rise up. And then once it stops, you may see it reclamp. Let's see how this works. So just closing down into the subject, and ended up looking at diatoms. Must be an interesting route there. If you're happy to, you sure you're happy to do that? Brilliant. Okay, so it's great to.
It feels like to hold a Vibra core as it's going into the ground, which is something we do a lot of. Yeah, I can.
So here we go. So Jacob Helgeson is from the University of Alabama. Oh, they didn't do it that time. Normally when I say that. Well, no, it's too late now. I missed the cue. He's gonna talk to you now about his interest. Well, whatever you like, really, Jacob. So I'm gonna hand over to him.
Yeah, hello everybody. I am Jacob. I am from the University of Alabama, and I'm starting my master's this fall, focusing more on micropaleontology and climatic conditions in Antarctica. So you might be wondering why I'm here in northern Patagonia, southern Chile. It's all connected because some of the stuff that I'm working with in Antarctica is involving some iron inputs comparatively here, where we've got iron inputs from the ash from the 2008 Chaiten volcano eruption. And with that information, we can find very interesting ecological changes, with iron being probably one of the most primary components of the diatom. And the diatom is a protist in the water. They make up about 40% of our atmospheric oxygen.
How many cells?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, part of my work includes counting diatoms and noting how many of each genus and species there are. And within the last year alone, I've counted probably well over 15,000 to 20,000 diatoms, which is insane to think about. Because believe it or not, it feels like there was no time that passed when I was counting those. And that's part of it. I mean, I really do enjoy it. It's so fun to, I mean, you might be thinking, well, you're counting for hours. Well, yeah. But they're so fascinating to look at, and thinking about climatic conditions and seasonal variation, especially in Antarctica with melt conditions, with anthropogenic change, we see a lot of seasonal diatom change, and they can tell us a lot about the future of our climate. So they really do tell us quite the story. And actually, a little tidbit information, I love stories, and I actually used to write a lot, and I think that might be a part of why I'm so interested in diatoms, because they tell such a immaculate story when you look at the grand scheme of things. And they're just fascinating. They're so fascinating. They're made out of silica, which is what is a part of these tephra class that came from the 2008 Chaiten eruption, and that input of silica as well as the input of iron from the ash. Hopefully we can see some sort of increase in population, density, diversity changes, and really it's just finding that climatic change. So
Why do you think they make their cell walls out of silica? Why do they build their houses out of glass?
Yeah. So they, as long as I remember correctly, they make their cells out of they're very, very complicated structures. They've got all of their cellular components that you may have learned about in middle school and high school in the middle of this immaculate, porous glass shell. And the glass shell enhances the ability for them to initiate photosynthesis. and it makes it with the reflective abilities, they can enhance that ability and increase growth and division rates. So it makes
I will also inform to that team.
It makes that a lot easier for them.
And also, lets the light in.
Yeah, yeah.
You're making food from photosynthesis, so.
Yep, yep. It's
Glass
all about
lets the
energy.
light in. Yeah.
It's all about energy. So, yeah.
But they're not the only silica producers in the oceans. What are some of the other micros that you've seen while you're picking or counting the diatoms?
Talking about dinoflagellates? No.
Silica flagellates?
Oh, silica flagellates. Yeah. So there are also these very immaculate, almost they're spiky hexagonal, at least from the genus Dictyota. They have this hexagonal, spiky structure made out of silica, and they are also huge climatic condition drivers. Well, not drivers, but they tell us a lot about the climatic conditions.
Yeah. There aren't as many of them.
No.
They're so cool. They're there. They're around the desert.
Yeah. But also very, very fascinating. And I count.
And radiolarians. There's quite a few radiolarians in this course. So.
Oh, really?
Radiolarians? We need to do a science talk on micro.
Do you want to talk about radiolarians?
It's okay, we'll save it for later, but I'm gonna make you guys talk about it. I'm gonna show you all my lectures on radiolarians. They're rad. But they also have these spiky structures of silica, right? They've been around for a really long time, like 500 million years.
Mm-hmm.
They're the OG of the silica world.
Yep.
So, I don't have many Americans in here. All the Phanerozoic, NBD.
Yeah, so
But radiolarians are very similar, in that they're photosynthetic. Well, actually, some of them can they can eat things too. But anyway, radiolarians are really, really cool, beautiful structures. Look up Ernst Haeckel and his drawings. Radiolarians are some of the sort of poster children for micropaleontology in the 1800s when it was becoming popular.
Yeah.
So were diatoms, but radiolarians more so because there's a lot of art based on them. And then, so they competed with the diatoms in the Cenozoic after diatoms evolved. Like diatoms first came in about the Jurassic, so we're talking, about a late Jurassic, I think some of the earliest. So we're talking like 200 million years ago, 240, something like that. It's debated.
So are their structures stronger than diatom structures?
Well, here's the deal. They were, living in the oceans, right?
Right.
They both need silica, and they start, competing for silica to build these glass houses. And this competition goes on and on and on for millions of years, and it gets cold, and with glaciation starting, Oligocene, and then we have, southern hemispheric glaciation in Antarctica, and then in the northern hemisphere, in the very late Cenozoic, like 3-5 million years ago, we know that we have both hemispheres glaciated, and the diatoms just take off. And the radiolarians are a relatively small component. So there's been like an ongoing war between the two of them.
Yeah. So something that is one of the challenges with diatoms and climatic storytelling is that diatoms, after so many years, they can be crushed, they can be molded due to the pressure and temperature of the sediments. So with diatoms, the deeper you go into the sediments, the less you can really get whole diatom structures that can tell you about that kind of stuff.
I meant 140 million years ago for the late Jurassic. Nobody, this is being recorded. Oh no. This is terrible. I studied the Oxfordian.
We're probably going to shut the stream down now, so I think, Seb, if you'd like to give a sign up, and then we can rejoin everyone in a few hours for dive number 2 of the day.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks everyone, and thanks Jacob. We can certainly carry on our diatom, radiolarian and Jurassic chat later, and recontinue, hopefully in a second dive later today. Probably 3 or 4 hours time, all being well, but of course we'll see how things look when we get back on deck, but hopefully a second one today. So thanks again everyone for joining. It's great to have you all joining this dive, and we'll look forward to sharing some more of this with you later. Thank you.